Hello and welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Liu Xin. In this series, I dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to make up for the missing, sometimes deliberately, pieces of the puzzle. So join me in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Weibo, or WeChat. We live stream Headline Buster at 11 a.m. Beijing time on Thursdays and air the segment on TV at 11:30 on Fridays. So do join me during the live streaming and get in touch. I would love to receive and possibly read out your insightful comments. A butterfly flapping its wings in a big void. Now, can you picture that in your head? What an exercise in futility. Some are comparing this to the endeavor by a group of developing countries to synchronize their efforts towards greater growth and a bigger say in the world. By that, I mean the BRICS. You should know by now what I mean. This week, South Africa is hosting a major in-person summit in Johannesburg, the first in 3 years, where leaders of 1/3 of the world's economy and 2/5 of its population are meeting. Keywords: Africa, growth, sustainability, inclusivity, and multilateralism. Now, a total of 67 developing countries in Africa and beyond have been invited. This group came into being as early as in 2009, when the world was reeling from the global financial crisis. Western governments and central bankers were running around like a headless chicken without having the slightest idea what has just happened and how to clean up the mess. But 4 emerging economies stood out with their steady growth and great potential. They were Brazil, Russia, India, and China, giving rise to the term BRIC. They held their first summit in Russia in 2009. Within a year, South Africa joined. Now, it's plural, BRICS. The interest in the media towards the BRICS has always been non-existent. Last year, when we covered the topic, we had difficulty finding materials to critique. The pathetic few articles mocked the group rather than report on it. A disparate quintet, a motley crew, or an odd grouping, to put it politely. That, however, dramatically changed this year, as suddenly there seems to be a burst of interest, hence the scramble to make up the void. No wonder the latest installment of The Economist asking, what is the point of the BRICS? 14 years later, what is the point of the BRICS? It's like asking a 14-year-old boy, who are you? Where do you come from? What's the point of your existence? Let me share some facts for the latecomers. The BRICS is bigger than you think. Its share in the global economy nearly doubled since 1995 to reach 32% in purchasing parity terms. If you don't understand that, look it up. Yet, as of 2022, their combined voting rights in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are only still 14% each. Something has to be done. Now, this year's BRICS Summit comes at a juncture. In his address, Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for deeper cooperation in business, finance, and security to promote development and peace. He also calls for more people-to-people exchanges and mutual learning between civilizations. Improving global governance is, of course, also important. But look into the media reports around you. It's the same old boring stuff. They focus primarily on 3 aspects. Now, highlighting division over unity among the BRICS, twisting China's role and influence in the group, and depicting the BRICS as a threat to the current world order. But as the saying goes, the lady does protest too much, methinks. What do I mean? How exactly do the mainstream media cover the summit? Well, a New York Times article rightly points out BRICS meeting attracts global interest not seen in years. Not seen in the West in years, by the way. But sudden awakening anyway. However, that doesn't necessarily mean a sober mind. If you were expecting positive reporting complete with bells and whistles, you'd be disappointed. Remember the motley crew analogy of the BRICS? It's apples and oranges by the looks of it, a buffet of different systems and ideologies with different levels of development on different continents and sometimes at odds on geopolitics. There are fault lines between members, and the conflict in Ukraine puts some members in an awkward position. This, however, led to a columnist at Reuters to suggest disbanding the BRICS. Developing countries can benefit from playing one superpower off against the other, it writes. Other countries won't want to be equal distance from the two superpowers, claims the column. What the article forgets to mention that there is a third way, working together to tackle common problems such as climate change or economic and financial instability. A good example is the creation in 2015 of the New Development Bank, or what many people call the BRICS Bank, as an alternative to traditional institutions such as the World Bank. The BRICS have also set up the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, a special tool to protect them from financial instability and currency speculation. Because of obvious differences, the BRICS is not a clique. Member countries accommodate their differences while working together. That's probably why the group is so fascinating. As Erastus Moencha, a former deputy chairperson of the African Union Commission, puts it, this BRICS brings the best out of countries that may not agree on every item on the agenda, but when it comes to matters of mutual interest, they set aside their differences and stand together. India's External Affairs Ministry spokesperson was quoted to have said that India has approached the issue of BRICS enlargement, one of the important talking points, with a very positive mind and positive framework. He rejected insinuations from Western think tanks such as the Lowy Institute or the Atlantic Council that India is against enlargement, so nothing to write home about here. The second common theme in BRICS-related reporting is China. According to the Reuters, the BRICS nations are meeting to seek to blunt Western dominance. China, it writes, seeking to expand its geopolitical influence as it tussles with the United States, wants to enlarge BRICS quickly, while some other members may not agree. Here we go again. China, the usual suspect. Let's be clear. The problem for the West is the C in BRICS. Let's look into this a bit more closely. An opinion piece published on August the 17th in the South China Morning Post tells you China's overwhelming dominance is jeopardizing not just the expansion plans, but the very existence of the group. At the root of the club's lack of cohesion, says the article, is the overwhelming dominance of China, and the only BRICS member that has made meaningful progress in converging with the developed world by becoming a knowledge-based and data-driven economy. Who said the BRICS should become an exclusive club of poor countries? The fact that China continues to pursue economic globalization and make progress should be welcomed, not just by the developed world, but by developing emerging economies too, for obvious reasons. And how much cohesion is there among the US-led West? Before we try to sow the seeds of resentment here, maybe we should examine the Western club first. It gets worse in this piece from the Financial Times published end of July. It says that BRICS nations risk becoming satellites of China. Nice try, very vivid imagery. The developing world revolving around China. India will tell you not to speak for them. In fact, the 24 applicant countries will tell you not to speak for them. Be a little bit respectful. They know what they're doing. But for some other media, the gloves are off and it's no holds barred. China is leading the charge, as the Financial Times suggested on the eve of the summit in Johannesburg. This article declares that China's intention is for BRICS to become geopolitical rival to G7, and it will even push the BRICS bloc of emerging markets to become a full-scale rival to the G7. Very imaginative and flattering, too, that China could have such kind of sway. So does the BRICS resort to some sort of Machiavellian tactics in order to get ahead and challenge or even bring down the West? Remember Blackadder? Looks more like Baldric's cunning plan to me. Tongues have been wagging for years now. De-dollarizing is in the air. In a macabre replay of The death by 1,000 cuts, weaning emerging and developing countries of their dependence on the US dollar could be a cut too far. So is a de-dollarization moment finally here, as foreign policy asks? The article reckons that the dollar's reign isn't likely to end overnight, but a common BRICS currency would begin the slow erosion of the dollar's dominance. Jim O'Neill, the man who coined the BRICS term originally, however, rejects the idea, saying it's ridiculous in an interview earlier this month. None of these things will ever happen until those BRICS countries want to have their currencies used by people in other parts of the world, he's reportedly saying. Mr. O'Neill may think it's ridiculous, but I beg to differ. Given how the US weaponizes the dollar and how they abuses it against countries they don't like, you'd be an idiot not to want another currency as an option. The topic may be off the table this time, but never say never. So for those who don't understand it yet, what's the point of the BRICS? Who are you? Where do you come from? And where are you going? Are Western media just missing the point and making a mountain out of a molehill? Or is it just that the BRICS, by expanding and drawing more countries, are pointing the way to a new kind of grouping that breaks away with the small circle mindset that still prevails in the West? Interestingly enough, even French President Emmanuel Macron expressed great interest in attending the BRICS Summit. That's a sign the wheels are turning. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, my guests will join me to discuss the details of this topic. They include Professor Gong from China, Mr. Charles Okechukwu Onunaiju from Nigeria, Gert Johannes Grobler from South Africa, and Klaus Larres joining us from the United States. Do stay with me. Welcome back to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point, with me coming to you from Beijing. My guests are, I'm very pleased to introduce them to you, Professor Klaus Larres, who is History and International Affairs Professor from University of North Carolina, Chapel, who is joining us from North Carolina. Hello, Mr. Professor Larres. Good to have you on the show. Hello. As always. Yeah, joining us from South Africa, Gert Johannes Grobler, who is a former senior diplomat of South Africa. He's joining us from Pretoria, South Africa. Mr. Grobler, good to have you again. And Professor Gong, who is Vice President of Research and Strategy from the University of International Business and Economics, Israel. He's joining us from China, I believe. And we also have our fourth guest, Charles Okechukwu Onunaiju, who is director of the Center for China Studies of Nigeria, one of the countries aspiring to join the BRICS. He is joining us from Nigeria. And Mr. Onunaiju, thank you very much for joining us. So, Mr. Grobler, let me go to you first, as you are in South Africa, the place where everything is happening. I don't know whether you read that article or not about what is the point of the BRICS. What is your, to me, that says a little bit about how the liberal media is covering the grouping that's important to developing countries, and increasingly. What would be your answer to this vitriolic snipe to BRICS?
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. And I was just saying that I attended some of the BRICS meetings, and there has been a very upbeat, a very positive mood here in South Africa, hosting BRICS, amongst others from the Business Forum, the BRICS Business Forum. That BRICS is a catalyst for positive change in our polarized world. And it's therefore not surprising that so many global South countries identifies with the values, the vision espoused by BRICS. And this is evident in the significant number of countries who now are appealing or wanting to join BRICS. The BRICS leaders in some of the meetings I attended have reaffirmed their commitment to a multipolar world as the only way or the best way to address the common challenges that humanity faces, and that through international cooperation. And I must say, the comment by the economist is typical of what you see from the Western media. But it was very interesting. There was an article that appeared over the weekend in a very reputable London newspaper called the London Observer. And I would like to quote from that because I think that sort of summarizes the current geopolitical situation. I'll quote it quickly. It says, quote, "If it sounds like a Cold War and it looks like a Cold War, then it probably is a new Cold War." And it says, and it poses this very important question: for what other interpretation is there to be placed on the US President Biden's latest and ongoing ramping up of diplomatic, economic, and military pressure on China? There will be a very strong emphasis on creating a better, fair, a more balanced world, and with a strong emphasis on international cooperation. So the economist, I mean, I read it regularly, comment is totally inappropriate.
We have a representative from one African country who is very interested in joining the BRICS, and let's get their perspective. Mr. Onunaiju joining us from Nigeria. So tell us a bit, what do people in Nigeria think of BRICS, and why is Nigeria interested to be part of it?
Thank you. Thank you for the privilege to be on the point, a very unique platform to advance a discourse on a global scale. Let me assure you that Nigerian Vice President, Mr. Shetima, is currently in South Africa to advance Nigerian desire to join the BRICS and participate in the process. For us in Nigeria here, right, even before this summit, there have been quite a lot of discourse, written articles written in several leading Nigerian newspapers by several well-known Nigerian figures, demanding that the country take its place in BRICS, insisting that Nigeria should go in that direction. So there had been a popular understanding among Nigerians that Nigeria should get involved in the BRICS mechanism and make contribution, and as well engage in opportunities provided by BRICS. So I can assure you that there is a groundswell of positive view of BRICS among Nigerians.
What kind of opportunities are Nigerians looking into specifically?
Yes, of course, like we have basically economic, essentially economic, and of course political. First and foremost, Nigeria has challenge of economy, especially the monocultural economy of dominant production of commodities. So, of course, the BRICS will offer us a serious opening in terms of economic diversification. Economic diversification has been a key theme, has been a major theme of Nigerian economic construction for several decades, breaking out from essential export of commodities, natural commodities, right, especially oil, been a huge distortion. So the idea of BRICS is something people thought is going to give us a broader market, and it will also open us up to inflow of investment from diverse sources, and especially, as you know, China is a critical strategic partner for Nigeria, and other countries in the BRICS are also a very important destination for
Before I forget,
of investment.
I do want to follow up with one more question, and Mr. Onunaiju. Why not enhancing your trip with the G7, with the developed countries, which can buy more of your products? Why the developing countries, which have limited purchasing power or consumer capacity, let's say? Very short, please.
Well, you may wish to know that in the past 50 years or so of post-independent Nigeria, the structural nature of our economy, which is tied to the West, has generated a lot of distortions. And like I told you, has simply boxed us into producing only commodities, and which has not helped the economy. We have this stranglehold of commodity economy, especially export of oil, which takes in almost 97% of our foreign exchange receipts. So there is a challenge to diversify this. And the structural nature, the traditional structure of international economy in which Nigeria was integrated has not enabled us to fully exploit the opportunity of diversifying the economy. So I think BRICS offers this essentially, basically, the idea of diversification of Nigerian economy, especially exposing, moving up to the industrial chain, and getting involved in the industrial chain is a critical factor in Nigeria aspiring to join the BRICS.
Yeah, thank you very much. Professor Laras, let me go to you. You are the representative of the Western narrative here, but please disagree if you wish to. The question really is, a lot of these reports are saying, look, this bloc is trying to bring down the Western dominance, or they're trying to disrupt or challenge the current world order that's dominated by the West. But my question really is, why shouldn't the West's dominance be challenged?
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the question. It's a pleasure to represent the entire Western world here, which I'm unable to do. Let me first say it is an important meeting which is taking place. Clearly, a lot of business will be conducted, a lot of political discussions will take place, not least about the Ukraine war and how possibly to overcome it. We know that South Africa and China, for example, want to put themselves forward as mediators to bring an end to this terrible war. But I would like to say that the expansion of an organization, and that is of course the intention of the BRICS meeting, or one of the intentions, does not necessarily lead to its success. When you look at the European Union with its 27 members now, that hasn't always made life more successful or easier for the participating states. And then also what we see in the media...
What do you base your doubts on? Why do you think it's not a short result?
No, that's because now you have 5 members. They can relatively easily communicate with each other and talk to each other despite certain tension, for example, between India and China. But it is easier to discuss things among 5 members than among 10 or among 20 members. This makes life simply more complicated. Look at the United Nations, for example, at the General Assembly. Look at also, partially at least, at the European Union with 27 members. It simply is more complex and needs a greater effort. But what I do notice in the international media and elsewhere is that bloc thinking, that the BRICS are competing with the G7, and the G7 are worried about the BRICS meeting. And I think that is the wrong approach. There is no harm in having the BRICS meeting and having another organization which hopefully brings economic development to the global south and perhaps other parts of the world. So I think that thinking in competition between the G7 and the BRICS is really misplaced. Both blocs, if you call them blocs, both organizations should really try to cooperate with each other for the sake of the global south and of course for other countries as well. And that, I think, should be one of the objectives of the current BRICS meeting, to perhaps reach out to the G7 and to find common ground and common cooperation to the benefit, in the last resort, to all of us.
Professor Gong, finally, it's your turn. What is the biggest point you want to address at this moment? You've heard so much.
I will start by addressing the initial question you asked at the very beginning of the program. What's the point of BRICS? Certainly, BRICS is a political organization designed to counter the weight and the condescending arrogance, in my view, towards the global south. It's a place where the global south, the developing countries, the emerging market economies can get together to voice their opinion regarding global matters. I think the fundamental answer lies in South Africa President Ramaphosa's speech. He specifically said that developing countries are not going to be bullied by the West to side with a certain political position. I think that speaks to volume about the current situation between the South and the North. But other than that, I would say the comparison between G7 and BRICS is probably not that appropriate, because BRICS is fundamentally about a non-alignment cause. It's a partnership. It's not a alliance, versus the G7 is a total alliance. I mean, they synchronize things on a range of political, even defense issues. And also, I want to also add another point. BRICS is more than just a talking place. BRICS has a functioning bank called New Development Bank under the directive of the BRICS. It has made, if I remember this correctly, $33 billion of loan to many developing countries for economic development. So clearly, another very interesting and also very important mission of the BRICS is for economic development. Also again, in President Ramaphosa's speech, he specifically called for total transformation of the international financial institutions. We talk about making these loans to the developing world without conditions, exactly as the New Development Bank has been doing,
right,
and exactly opposite to what organizations like the IMF and the World Bank have been doing. So I think if you look at the economic agenda of BRICS, the political agenda of the BRICS, there's an entire reason why this should exist. So in that regard, I totally reject the article you cited by economists. It doesn't sync up with the reality at all.
And it doesn't speak up with the status of the publication, looked up upon by so many people around the world. We have to leave it there. Hard work is in the details and in unity. Many thanks to my guests, Professor Gong, Vice President of Research and Strategy of the University of International Business and Economics, Israel, Charles Okechukwu, Onunaiju, Director of Center for China Studies of Nigeria, Gert Johannes Grobler, a former senior diplomat from South Africa, and Professor Klaus Laris, History and International Affairs Professor from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. Thanks for watching. On behalf of the whole team, you've got the point.